Hi everyone, welcome to Module 2. In this module, we will focus on the rhetorical triangle. Now, the rhetorical triangle is something that we will come back to over and over again the entirety of the semester. So this entire module is dedicated to first understanding what the rhetorical triangle is, then looking at its three components, and then looking at how to actually apply it in terms of argumentation. Now, we'll start this week just focusing again on the rhetorical triangle pieces, but you'll see as we move further into the class, we will come back to it and you will be expected to apply the different components in your own argumentation. Now, this is our first section on rhetoric, and we'll talk just a minute about what rhetoric is, but this is what we call classic rhetoric. In a few weeks, we will also take a look at modern rhetoric, and you will take the pieces from the classic rhetoric and the modern rhetoric parts, and you will put them all together in your final paper weeks from now. All right, so let's take a look at first Aristotle's rhetorical triangle. Now, before we move into the actual components, let's take a quick look and just making sure we're clear on what the definition of rhetoric is. So this is the art and the study and the art of using language effectively. So we're really focusing on language use and everything that goes along with it in order to create meaning. So it involves analyzing the choices that authors and speakers make, looking at effective techniques to make meaning, and then how rhetoric makes persuasion possible. So all of this works together within the context of the rhetorical triangle. Now, if we scroll back up here, looking at the actual rhetorical triangle, so where this came from is that we think of Aristotle as kind of the grandfather or the godfather, however you want to think of it, of classic rhetoric. The argumentation style of classic rhetoric came from him, the Aristotelian argument, and it's based on the rhetorical triangle. So you want to think of the rhetorical triangle as appeals, and we use those appeals in order to persuade. Now, in the context of rhetoric, that's one of the, as you see right here, that's one of the effective techniques to make meaning. So this all works together. So you'll see with the rhetorical triangle, and you may have seen this in philosophy or other English classes, but it takes a slightly different context when it comes to argumentation. So you see that we have logos, the appeal to intellect, we have ethos, the appeal to ethics or ethical thinking, ethical reasoning, and then we have pathos, the appeal to emotions. Okay, so let's go down a little further here. So according to Aristotle, the rhetorical transaction has, again, pathos, logos, and ethos. Now, the important part of what I want to mention here is that all of these pieces, the pathos, logos, and ethos, it's a trilateral relationship, meaning that each of the components influences each other, and that they're all influenced by the context of the communication. So ethos, the appeal to emotion, affects the way that you can appeal to logic, affects the way that you appeal to credibility, and then they all work together and they're all influenced by the context of the communication. So we're looking at the actual mode of communication. So in your case, it'll be writing, it'll be academic writing, and it's also influenced by the time, it's influenced by the urgency of the topic, it's influenced by the meaning of the topic, the controversy, everything that works together. Now, each point of this triangle bears responsibility for the success of the communication, and in your case, it's the success of argumentation and persuasion. Now, again, you will use this for all of your argumentation and persuasion that you do in this class. So you'll start out with this classic rhetoric part, and you'll add the modern rhetoric as we go forward. Now, what I want you to think about when you're looking at the rhetorical triangle is how you see these appeals play out in both your everyday life and then also in an academic setting. You know, we often don't notice the techniques that are being used in our everyday lives. We don't consciously point them out. But as we're moving into this, I want you to start taking a look at things, looking at commercials, looking at the way that you that people approach you, that you that you try to convince each other, that you may have arguments, looking at social media posts, what people share, and the language that is used to try to convey the meaning of it. You know, all of this works together, and when we start consciously thinking about it, we really can see this play out in every type of communication. Now, what I want to do here is just briefly touch on how these appeals play out in academic writing typically. And again, you'll see these in your everyday life as well. We don't consciously point them out typically. There are 3 readings for you to complete after this, and they will go into more detail about how this works. I just want to do a quick overview just to get you started before you jump into the chapters. So our first one, appeal to pathos, which is appeal to emotion. You want to think of it that we want to gain the audience's sympathy and empathy. And the reason that we do this is because your reader, they need to care about the topic, they need to be interested in the topic, and they need to grasp the significance of the topic. There has to be some sort of sympathy and empathy from your reader in order for your argument to be successful. You know, otherwise, if nobody cares, if they don't think it's significant, it's very unlikely that you're going to persuade them, no matter what type of argument you're making. So you see on here different ways to do that. Just looking at vivid emotional language, and that can be positive and negative, using connotative definitions. Connotative means cultural or emotional definitions of words. Using emotional examples, so we insert narratives, extensive description, tone, emotional tone, figurative language. Okay, but we cannot make a logical, clear, and supported argument on emotion alone, because that becomes too manipulative. So we have to have logos. Now, some people think of pathos and logos as opposites. It's more like they support each other, you know, that we appeal to emotion to get people interested in caring, and then we back it up with logic, okay, that we have evidence, that we have statistics, we have facts, we have reasoning. They work hand in hand. Logic and emotion work together. They are not fighting each other. So again, you appeal to logic or reasoning with clear, rational ideas. Think of it as kind of the consistency of your message, the clarity, the logic, the effectiveness of the evidence. How do we do this in arguments? Having coherent thought, and that means having well-organized lines of reasoning and thinking, and not meandering all over. Elaboration, being able to move beyond the basic. Denotative definition meaning the dictionary definitions of words. Literal and historical analogies, but we have to have validity and similarity in that sense. Don't just put random historical analogies in there just to have something. And then factual data and statistics. Now, as you saw in the last module, we do have to think about and really look at where our facts come from and making sure that they're valid. That's the important part of it. But, you know, if you're working with verified information, you're fine. And then our last one, this is typically the hardest one to understand and to recognize because it's not something we can just point out. So with ethos, we're appealing to trustworthiness and authority, character, credibility, ethics. You know, that's not always something that we can just point out in a sentence or a paragraph. There are other parts that come into it. So let's think about some ways to do it. So first, using an appropriate tone of vocabulary for the subject matter and the audience. How does that create credibility? Well, you think about it that it shows that the writer understands who they're writing for and they understand how to handle the topic. And that helps to build credibility. You know, if you're using inappropriate tone, then that creates a sense of, you know, dis-ease with the audience, that they feel like, okay, this person doesn't really feel trustworthy. Our next thing, sincere and fair-minded presentation. So meaning that you address the validity of all or both sides of your argument. Of course, we are taking a stand when we make an argument. You know, we're taking a direct stand for whatever it is that we're trying to prove. But we don't want to dismiss the other side of the argument. You know, there is validity to all sides of an argument when, of course, we're dealing with something that is worth debating. And so we want to address, we don't want to just say with the counter argument, like, hey, here's the counter argument and move on. We have to really be able to consider the other side and understand why it is the other side would feel the way that they do. But then we also can break it down and show why ultimately our argument is a better situation. You know, so we don't want to just be dismissive of the other side of the argument, which, you know, we see that in politics all the time, that politicians just constantly dismiss each other. They dismiss the other side. They don't look for similarities. They don't look for, you know, possible validity. And they don't look at the gray area a lot of time. Keep in mind that it's very rare that people are black or white when it comes to being on a spectrum of what they believe. You know, we don't have like hardcore, I'm this or I'm that. Most of us with a lot of we fall kind of in that gray area in the middle. So we have to be able to think about that and be fair-minded. The next thing, correct grammar, and that's in the context of what it is you're writing for. Grammar is important, especially when it's tied to showing your authority. And then lastly, citations from experts and authorities, the use of their reputation. Now, we're in an English class, and in an English class, none of us are experts at the topics that we'll be looking at. You know, everyone will have different topics that you'll work with throughout the duration of the semester. You're a student, you know, you're not an expert in the field yet, and that's absolutely fine. Most writers are not experts in their field. They are experts at writing. But what do? They use the reputation from experts and authorities to create that sense of authority, to create that credibility within their arguments. So this is really where the importance of research comes in, and we will move into that starting next week. All right, so this is just a quick overview and introduction to the rhetorical triangle. Again, there are 3 articles to read, one on pathos, one on logos, one on ethos, to really get you the details of each of these components. And then what you'll do is to go ahead and move into the writing exercises. The first 3, there's one again on pathos, one on logos, one on ethos, so you'll look at them separately. And then the 4th writing exercise, you will put everything together and do your first analysis of the rhetorical triangle in action. So if you have any questions about this, again, feel free to reach out to me through Canvas email.